Hello, and welcome to the 4 Ps of professional, perfunctory podcasting.
Do you know what those 4 Ps, or as I like to say,
I'm going to remember it forever, Josh.
but these are 4 Ps for podcasting success, because what do you put in a pod besides Ps?
4?
Right, brilliant marketing on my part.
I love it. It's great. It's great.
We're going to talk about how you can make a podcast for your B2B business and maybe why you might want to.
Exactly, in 4 simple Ps. So
Right.
I'm Susan.
And I'm Josh. And Susan, what's your favorite P word?
I like perfunctory. It just came to me, but I don't know what it means.
It means like short and succinct and like very take charge. It's a good P word. I like it.
Okay.
Mine is punctual.
Punctual.
It's something I aspire to. But it's an aspirational P word is what I got there.
It's good to be aspirational. Okay, well, we'll try to be perfunctory as we teach the 4 Ps of business, B2B, podcasting. And business is part of B2B, so we'll just move on. Okay, but first, why should a business even consider starting a podcast?
Why indeed? Well, to start off with, we as marketers know that we are hitting somewhat of a content crisis, right? There's a lot of content out there, and people are consuming less and less of it. People are more likely to be dialed into exactly what they are looking for and not really in the mood to have their attention be grabbed by something else. In fact, reading in America is declining at some shocking rates.
It's shocking.
The share of Americans who read for pleasure on a given day has fallen by more than 30%. Since 2004. I am guilty as charged.
Totally, same.
It's hard to find time to read, but people maybe do have time to consume other types of media.
Yeah, and what are we as marketers outputting on a daily basis?
For the most part, text.
Yeah,
for
exactly.
Sure. And text is good. You know, we don't want to slag that down any, but we are talking about the need to grab a different kind of audience. But we have some more data on that, actually. Did you know that over 40% of people admit that they skim over blog posts?
Guilty.
The beautiful words that I write for you?
I know, it's sad. And how much time are we putting into writing that content? But as you say, you know, still a percentage of Americans are reading, and it's crawlable by search, so it can be found and bring your targets to your destinations and your channels.
Right, so we need something that is maybe the best of both worlds. I mean, the average time that people are spending reading an article these days is about 37 seconds.
37 seconds.
Which is not a lot of seconds. Now, our time on page, I'm happy to say, is quite a bit better than that, but that is the average.
Exactly. Shocking again.
But there is good news for marketers, I feel.
Yeah.
Audio consumption of content is on the rise.
Which is great.
So we're talking about podcasts, I should say first, because I was amazed by this. It stands for personal on demand.
Really?
Yeah, the pod in podcast actually means something, so it's kind of amazing. But podcast started in around 2003. And so it's an old technology, but it's beginning to get more and more traction because of the smartphone revolution. Started around 2007, but it's getting easier and easier for people to listen to podcasts, and the podcast content, I think, is becoming more and more compelling as well.
Yeah, I'm always walking around home with my headphones on listening to something.
Do you listen to the murder ones? Are you into the murder podcasts?
I don't.
No, I don't either. But people who listen to podcasts are more likely to listen to more than one.
Yes.
So this is a growing audience. 22% of people said that if they're going to have one, they listen every week. That's up from 7% in 2013. And people who listen to one tend to listen to two. People who listen to two tend to listen to more. So it is a habit-forming media, and it's one that has a way bigger attention span than a lot of the other forms of content that we talk about.
Yeah, there's so much data if you need to build a case to do business podcasting internally, including drivers within the podcast market.
Actual people who are driving.
Right.
Are listening to podcasts.
Yeah.
That is one major driver, but another one is smart speakers.
Yeah.
So if you listen to, say, the NPR podcasts like Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, they'll say, and now you can say, Alexa, play the Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me podcast, and they'll play it. So these smart speakers are helping drive adoption. People who are listening to these tend to be focusing their attention in those spaces where there's not another good medium to fill it. So think about working out, driving, doing dishes, that kind of thing.
Right, exactly. So the beautiful thing for marketers is now you can be present with your targets as they're in a very comfortable environment, like, cooking up some sausage at home.
Right.
Okay, good. Ooh, and the consumption of podcasts is multiple times a week, as you said before.
Yeah, so it just tends to keep growing. Once you get into podcasts, I can attest to that.
Yeah.
I used to have one that I listened to in my app, but now I have, I think, 10 or 15 that I try to check in with on a weekly basis. So the content is out there, but a lot of this is B2C content. And what we're seeing is there are some B2B podcasts that are beginning to fill that space, but there is still an enormous amount of space that is available for B2B podcasts. And we've seen, though, that HubSpot says 17% of marketers are planning to add podcasting to their marketing efforts in the next year. So that space, that beautiful blue ocean of podcasting is quickly going to fill up. Those who get there early are going to be able to build that subscriber base and going to have a little more success, I believe.
Yeah, and we're working with quite a few B2B marketers who see that opportunity. In fact, you're our head podcast guru, right? Helping B2B clients from concept to branding to producing to completion to measurement.
Well, and not to toot my own horn, but yes, absolutely. I have been doing that for very many brands, and I'm finding that really rewarding. So it's such a different way to go at it. Usually I'm a written content kind of person. I still love that, but getting into this audio production, part of it has been really rewarding.
Exactly. So that can help you build a case if you need data to convince your stakeholders that podcasting is a way to augment your mix. And then you've got a decision to make once you decide you want to move forward, and that is do it in-house, build out a team, and actually get it all done, which is why we thought we'd build this webinar for you, the of podcasting. Ooh, I did it better than
I'm sorry,
you.
it's pronounced.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Right? Or you can partner. So with that, we'll start on the first P.
Yep, so we want to lay this all out for you so you can see, is this something that we want to take on internally, or is this something that we could use a little help with from, say, an agency who has been working with major B2B brands in the space and has developed a kind of turnkey solution for podcasting. Yeah. So we're not going to hit that too hard. We actually do want to make this so anybody who listens to this can make their own thing. So let's talk about our... The first P in our plan, the first P in our pod is the planning piece. And that involves thinking about how you're going to put this content together in a way that will compel your audience. So this is a lot like any type of content research that you're going to do. You want to think about what questions your audience has, what they need to know, what they want to hear. You're looking to hit that sweet spot of your brand's expertise, your unique point of view, and what your audience needs to hear. So that is common to every type of content, but you want to stay more top of funnel for a podcast. It's not a chance really to sell your offering, it's a chance to establish yourself as a thought leader in the community and really drive that value.
Exactly.
So when we're doing content research, some of the tools that we like to use, BuzzSumo is a partner of ours. They have an amazing tool for finding out what type of content is being shared most for keywords, what questions are being asked. I like a tool called Answer the Public. It's a free tool, very simple one. Put in your keywords and you get a lovely visual of an old man in a turtleneck kind of stroking his beard and thinking about it, but then it pulls the questions that people are asking from
That's my
across
son, Josh.
multiple platforms. Well, he's a very handsome man. I can see the resemblance.
Thank you.
If you like.
Sorry, Answer the Public. Back to you.
Right. And of course, you want to look in a way that's unique to podcasting. You want to look at podcast channels to see what's already out there.
Yes.
So take your keywords and plug them into podcast search engines because they operate a little bit differently than just your Googles or your Bings or your Yahoos or Ask Jeeves or Lycos or Dogpile or StumbleUpon.
Great tools.
Just going through the search engine graveyard there. But look in the Apple Podcast search and the Google Play search, the Stitcher search to see what is already out there and how people are grabbing an audience. And that's a way to see how your podcast can be aimed at the audience you're looking for.
And which podcast channel is the most pertinent to B2B? Is there one?
Yeah, we'll get a lot into platforms and directories and the difference between the two as we go through our plan, but I would say Stitcher is the one that B2B audiences are most likely to see.
Okay, great. Good.
Gotta move on.
Okay, great.
Did I skip a slide?
Well, it's kind of the same as the other one. We're talking about.
Oh, so yeah. All right. So we can drop back into that, to this one.
You want to go to that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any more planning?
Okay. Well, first, when you're thinking about optimizing for podcast search, so you've already looked in those directories to see how things are listed. As with written content, you need a compelling visual, you need a hook, you need a great title. The difference with podcasts is when you're trying to get people's attention, that's all you have.
Yeah.
You have one small square image for your podcast that needs to encapsulate the look and feel of it. You need to have a title of the podcast that grabs people's attention, gives them a little bit of information, leaves them wanting. For example, SAP has one called Tech Unknown, which is beautiful. Tech Unknown.
Right, it's
what
beautiful.
What does that mean? Oh, I have to learn more. So that hook, and then the title of each episode, and a brief description, that's all you have. So as a marketer, this is a great challenge for me to see how much information I can pack in there and really hook people in. So that's what to think about when optimizing for search on podcast directories. That's got to be part of your planning stage.
And you've got to really think about the device you're searching on. So this is mobile heavy.
Mm-hmm. And the less is better, because if they have to click that, read more, odds are they're not going to.
Okay. Oh, good point. Okay. All right. So planning. On to the second P.
Yep. Produce. So we're all the way up to just a couple P's, right? So second P on our pod is producing, and that means planning for syndication to podcast directories. So we have to talk about the difference between a podcast platform and a podcast directory. I can do that real quick.
Great.
A platform, think of it as like a WordPress blog, like a CMS. The platform is where you have your audio files that are connected with the title and the description of your podcast, and you load your files into the platform. Platform provides the hosting, makes those files available, and then it syndicates that content out to podcast directories.
Okay.
So our platform of choice for our agency, we tend to use Libsyn. There are other platforms out there, like Podbean is another good one for providing a little bit of analytics service and providing that hosting. The directories are the places where people are going to go to find your podcast.
Okay.
So that is a crucial part of the whole equation. And it's important to register your podcast with all of these. The content will be automatically syndicated to them from your platform, but only once you register with the platforms. So we recommend creating an email account that will go with your podcast that you can then use to create an account on all these directories. And it's a pretty complicated thing, but to help, I am giving you access to the checklist that I use to launch podcasts, and we've prettied it up for you, and that'll be available at that bit.ly code that we have in the beginning, and possibly up there, or possibly down there.
Or over there.
Could be over there. Look for that bit.ly code to get that resource. So the directories we want to look at, Apple Podcasts is the biggest one. They are going to give you the most detailed analytics, so it's great to have people subscribe there. Google Play Podcast is up and coming with analytics. Google is also starting to transcribe automatically podcasts that are hosted in Google Play Analytics, and they could be showing up in search results soon. We haven't seen it yet, but they've announced it, so that's exciting. Spotify is one that we usually think of as B2C, playing playlists of awesome 90s music, if you're me.
Yeah.
But they have a thriving podcast community. We found quite a bit of audience there for our B2B brands. And Stitcher is the main B2B go-to for folks who aren't doing Apple or Google. The other one that I would mention that's up and coming is TuneIn. And their most important feature is that they are what Alexa uses to play podcasts. So if you want people to be able to say, Alexa, play the Tech Unknown podcast, then you're going to have to get on TuneIn.
So this is like when I'm cooking my sausage at home in the kitchen, I say, Alexa, play SAP Tech Unknown, as an example.
Exactly. You're really making me want sausage now, though.
I know, right? I'm super hungry. Okay.
So your platform is going to charge a fee for hosting depending on the storage that you want and the capacity and the degree of analytics that you want, the granularity there. Registering on all of these directories, though, is free, and that's a really important piece of the pie.
Okay, so there's a lot to do. And just to confirm, there's really no way around the platform. That's kind of analogous to a WordPress for your blog.
Right. You could host something just on your company's web space, but then you wouldn't have the benefit of those syndication tools and those analytics tools. So we do recommend going with the platform.
Okay, do the platform. Perfect.
I would talk about one of the podcasts that we promoted is 3M's Science Champions podcast. Really cool. We talked to to astronaut Abby, a 16-year-old at the time who wants to have a mission to Mars. We've talked to people who write comic books about physics and all kinds of fun stuff. But when we hosted for them, we set up the platform and all of those directories so that you can find that podcast wherever people listen to podcasts. It's a very organic process. But then they also have a directory that's hosted on their page where people can go and see all the episodes and some bonus content that we put out there for them.
Perfect. Okay, are we on to the next P?
Yep, I think we're on to...
I love it.
It's just the third one, yeah.
You're so good at this.
The third P in the pod. So when we're talking about publishing your podcast, the audio part of that is simple. Stick it into your platform, hit publish, just like a WordPress blog. It's going to syndicate out to all the platforms. But we recommend that when you publish, you also publish a blog post with a transcript of your podcast and an embed for the listen.
Okay, but I thought people weren't reading anymore.
Oh, but some of them are, and some of them don't have the capacity to do audio at work. Some of them, it may be an accessibility issue, so we want to make sure to grab the audience that we can. And we definitely want to use search engine functionality, search engine optimization to bring people to this content.
Perfect.
So it's a kind of an ad. People who otherwise wouldn't be able to listen can read the transcript, and people who can listen will now be aware of your podcast and all the episodes from that blog post. So because competition is so fierce for visibility on these platforms like iTunes, like Google Play, that blog can help drive subscriptions early on and help your podcast gain traction.
That makes sense. Got it.
So make a post for each episode, have a summary, some key takeaways, and then that full transcript, and put your podcast stream in there.
Okay, great. Do you have an example?
Well, I have an example that is not a podcast per se, but had a strong audio component.
I love that.
Client Profix had some influencers around artificial intelligence. We had an Adapt and Innovate AI, get it, campaign.
I do.
And we built an interactive asset with these audio interviews with influencers. But we realized that audio, as awesome as that is not going to get it to everyone who might be able to find it. So we transcribed that content within the asset and made it so that it could be found on Google. It was crawlable. And that actually brought in an extra audience for our nifty multimedia interactive thing.
So fundamentally, even podcasting is almost like an umbrella category for audio.
Right.
Okay, great.
Anytime you are collecting audio, I would be thinking towards podcasting. It's such a low investment setup to turn something into a podcast.
Right.
Especially if you have an agency who can do all the heavy lifting for you.
Exactly.
I feel like.
Any more publishing?
Yeah, so when we're publishing, the most important thing for me is committing to a cadence. Because we're trying to build a habit with our listeners, and we want to give them a promise that they can expect content in regular intervals. So I don't think that you need to publish once a day or once a week or necessarily once every 2 weeks. I think the most important thing is to be consistent.
Okay.
It doesn't really matter what that interval is. You got to pick the one that you can be consistent with. It's like I always say, I would rather publish one every 2 weeks than publish every week and have to take a 6-month hiatus while we make more.
Okay, it's like blogging then.
Right. And the other thing to keep in mind when you're publishing about that cadence is you should start with at least 3 episodes available for download before you launch. So this is because Apple, who, as we said, they are the 500-pound gorilla of podcasting, they have a new and notable list for each category of podcast. And to get on that list, you have to have 3 episodes at launch. So we recommend having those 3 and having at least 1 or 2 more to act as a buffer. While you are producing more episodes, you can be pulling from that pool that you have.
Okay, that's a great tip. And the average podcast listener listens to podcasts 7 times a week.
Mm-hmm. So you have plenty of opportunities to grab somebody.
Perfect. Okay, great. All righty. How are we doing on our P's?
Well, I think we're down to our 4th P.
Yeah.
We're all the way to the at the end. The fourth P in our pod is promotion. And again, you're going to find some similarities with other types of content and some challenges that are unique for podcasts. First off, I never know where to put this. I want to talk about adding influencers for amplification, but amplification is not the only thing that influencers do.
Right.
And it is something that should be included in your planning phase, is co-creating content with influencers. But at the end of it, I figured, well, we'll put it in amplification. So you are going to get higher quality dynamic content with influencers. You are going to get access to a wider audience, and you have that built-in amplification. So in the beginning, when you're thinking about your planning stage, think about that promotion and think about co-creating with influencers. And what we've found in the B2B space is that these folks who are really thought leaders in the industry, I mean, they're busy.
Yeah.
So they might not, if you say, hey, can you give me 250 or 300 words? Can you answer these 8 questions for me? They're not going to be super open to that. Mm-hmm. But if you have an existing relationship with them and you say, hey, can we get you on the phone for a 30-minute interview? Yeah. And we use a tool called Zencastr that I absolutely love. Is a free tool with some premium options that you can bring in, that all they have to do is click a URL that you send them, and it automatically puts you and the influencer in a private recording room, records both of your audio at the source, so you get high quality audio, and then gives you the WAV file, the uncompressed audio, to download.
That's awesome.
So super easy to get that interview done, and tends to be an easier ask for influencers.
Okay, and the reason you want influencers are...
Well, let's see. It's going to make your content more interesting, of course. You're going to have more voices in there, going to make it more compelling to your audience. It's going to give you access to their audience as well, and it's going to give you the opportunity to build a relationship with an influencer that could benefit both of your businesses in the long run. So a lot of those advantages of influencer marketing that we have been talking about for, I would say, before anybody else was talking about it. That tends to be a specialty of ours.
Exactly.
But all of those benefits you will see in having influencers in your B2B podcast.
Yeah, influencer marketing in B2B is far different from B2C.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There's less Instagram and people holding beauty products involved, and more like amazing thought leaders in your industry giving you this advice. I think, for an example for that, I would turn to one of our SAP programs that SAP Support had a podcast where we had 12 interviewers. So I'll pick it up from the beginning of that.
Okay.
So, I'll just start again. So an example of this that I love is we had the SAP Customer Support podcast, and for that one we got 12 influencers, and we asked all of them 6 questions. And then every episode we had a professional voiceover host, and then the answer from each of those influencers. So every influencer was on every episode. That made it really easy to get people to promote it. It gave us a lot of points of view for the episodes. We've also done, with the Tech Unknown episodes, we had an influencer who was our host, that SAP was able to secure her for the hosting, and then we had her interviewing other influencers in the field. That gave her the ability to do a live interview where she could pivot and explore things that were interesting to her in real time, and actually generated so much awesome content that we spun it off into another asset that we'll hint at that a little bit later on.
Perfect.
But you can see there are so many different ways that influencers can be made a part of a podcast, and I can't imagine trying to do a podcast without it.
And I think you're touching on something else here, Josh, is that there's many different ways that a podcast can be executed.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. So if you're thinking, oh gosh, right, I can't find somebody in my organization to host a series of podcasts, that's not absolutely necessary.
No. There are so many options.
Yeah.
You have an influencer host, you could have a voiceover host, you could have a subject matter expert. I think if you're an enterprise company, I'd say like a 3M, there's going to be somebody in there who is eager for that opportunity. And what we found with 3M is that their host, Jayshree Sait, I have to shout her out because she is incredible.
Go Jayshree.
And we had so much fun recording with her. And she, came from within the corporation, but she has done an amazing job hosting this podcast.
Yeah, agreed. Perfect. Any other promotional tips and tricks?
Yeah, so one of the ways that podcasts are different from any other type of content, I feel like, is it's not as competitive. It's not a zero-sum game where it's like, I need to grab everyone who's looking at this thing, I need to get them by the ears and wrench them over to look at my thing. Because we saw earlier, people who listen to one podcast are likely to listen to more, and that just tends to increase with the number of podcasts they're listening to. So if somebody is already listening to a podcast in your vertical, that means they are your target audience. That doesn't mean that that other podcast is competing for their attention. So I believe that it's worth checking with established podcasts in your vertical to see if there are some opportunities for cross-promotion. That means like your host could appear on their podcast and provide some amazing insights for them, give them some great content, and then drop a link to your podcast at the end. Or you could invite the host from another podcast onto yours. And either way, both of the podcasts are going to gain exposure to a new audience. And it's another one of those lovely ways where everybody wins.
Okay, so it's like a rising tide lifts all ships.
Mm-hmm. We all do better when we all do better.
I love that. Who said that?
Paul Wellstone.
Oh.
Amazing, one of my favorite politicians of all time. And having a favorite politician probably means I'm a very specific kind of nerd.
Yeah, exactly, right. Andy's from Minnesota, and so are we, just in case you were wondering about these accents.
Exactly. So if we're thinking about promotion, I have a couple of amazing examples that I would like to share.
Yes.
One of them is Dell Technologies has a Luminaries podcast is the name of it. And we have a partnership with them where they are producing the content themselves and we are helping with the promotion and with some of the supplementary material to make that happen. But they are doing everything right in podcasting, and it's a perfect example of how to do it. They start with amazing content. They have hosts who are just titans in the industry. They have Mark Schaefer and Doug Carr. You know, marketers know them. They at least know Doug's beard because it's down to here.
Yeah, it's a great beard.
Now. It's an amazing beard.
Someday.
I feel somewhat inadequate beard-wise when I look at him. But so they start with that amazing content. They have great guests. Even when they have like a Dell person, SME, on their podcast, it's someone with amazing stories to tell. Like, I was trekking through the jungle with my Dell laptop and I saw a lion and it tried to eat the laptop. You know. So they have amazing content. For promotion, they have a wonderful podcast homepage that has this beautifully designed grid where you can see all of the episodes and these amazingly compelling and beautiful summaries written just amazingly, probably by a very handsome person with, I feel, an entirely adequate beard.
Right.
And they, when you click through, then you can see the full transcript of the episode, but then also a summary with some of those key takeaways. And they're promoting it on social and through every channel that you would any type of content. And they have their influencers promoting. And that has all led to, after a year in the podcasting game, they are getting 15,000 downloads an episode.
That's amazing.
So that's what can happen when you're doing everything right, like that.
Yeah, and you do touch on something where it's important, I think, for B2B marketers to understand. You don't just have to think about the podcast channel itself, right? What are your other channels? Like,
right. There's an ecosystem to where the podcast can kind of be the base of it. That's what I feel. So one final thing that I want to say about promotion, though, and this is something that we are still building with our clients as well and advising, is internal promotion is a huge way to boost awareness. So if you're an enterprise-level organization, you have a built-in audience for podcasts. One of the ways that directories can tell algorithmically which podcast to promote is the level of engagement with the podcast. So if you were to have your employees actually listen and give an honest rating and a review, that level of engagement sends a signal to that algorithm early on that your podcast is worth promoting. So it's a way to light the fuse, to kick off the ball that starts the avalanche of the mixed metaphor of your podcast.
I love that mixed metaphor.
So those first 2 to 3 weeks are absolutely crucial. So it's the listening and sharing, but also just encouraging your employees to rate and review, and that's going to play a huge role in the success of your podcast.
Okay, super important. Did you have another story that covered the 4 Ps at all?
How did you know?
I'm just wondering.
I wanted to talk briefly about SAP Tech Unknown. They came to us with this gift of a title, Tech Unknown, such a beautiful title. And then they wanted to have an industry expert as the host. So Tamara McCleary agreed to host, and we stepped out of our comfort zone and said, we're going to do live recording sessions on Zencastr with Tamara and with our guest. And then we'll edit them after the fact, but we'll draft a few questions, and then we'll encourage Tamara to go off script and follow the threads that interest her. So we ended up with some amazing, compelling content. And after we had put all the episodes together and we put them out, we saw huge success. We beat every benchmark for 30-day listens for B2B podcasts. But after that, we found that we had some really amazing stories, and only some of them actually showed up in the podcast. Some of them were on the cutting room floor. Yep. This amazing stuff. So, for example, Kirk Bourne was on that podcast, and he helped work on the Hubble telescope.
Really?
Yeah, and he was at NASA when the Challenger explosion happened. So he had these amazing stories. So we were able to repackage those with the client into an asset that highlights those human stories, which then becomes something for people who might not have heard of the podcast, can still get that content. Another way to activate the influencers, another cool thing for them to share, and then also pulling attention back to that podcast, so the whole thing kind of feeds into itself in this lovely promotional circle of life.
Yeah, so podcasting really should be enjoyable, informative, just maybe, right, taking communications content to the next level.
Mm-hmm. That's it doesn't start with a P, so I couldn't figure out how to put it in there, but it needs to be compelling. Compelling.
Appropriate.
Punctual.
Perfunctory.
So if we're getting back to our plan.
Yeah, perfect.
The 4 Ps are planning.
Yep.
That's where you are figuring out your audience demand, what your audience wants to hear, figuring out the format of your podcast and how you're going to put it together. Producing is signing up for all those directories, getting the podcast branded, getting your platform set, and then publishing is syndicating out to those platforms, and promoting is, also publishing, you want to publish your blog posts and your transcripts.
Yep.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And then promoting is activating those influencers that you have in there. You have them in there, don't you?
We should.
Yes. And then pushing it out to all of your regular content distribution channels, but also using that internal promotion to make sure that you get listed in the directory.
Yep, perfect. So if you're thinking about moving forward with podcasting internally or partnering with someone, ask yourself a couple questions like, how much time is my target, are my users spending with my current content? Mm-hmm. And, some of our podcasts, people are spending quite a bit of time with, right?
How much time?
Well, about 35 minutes in the case of this customer support podcast that we did.
So if we're going to compare that to 37 seconds, I feel like that is quite a bit more time.
It's kind of a no-brainer. It's like, there is my business case. Just saying. All right, perfect. So if you'd like to work with a partner, ask yourself a few things, or ask a potential partner a few things. Like, do they develop your show brand, which we really didn't even touch on?
Right, there's the positioning in the market, there's securing the voice talent, there's music is a huge part of getting a hook that will let people know that this is a unique podcast that they're listening to and what it's about. Yeah. I like to find music that in 2 or 3 seconds will tell you the tone, the feel, and just what the general overall, start again. Yeah, just start that slide again.
Okay, great. So if you're looking for a partner, also ask yourself, or ask the partner, right, how do they help develop your show brand, which is something we didn't even touch on.
Yeah, so we're talking about how you're going to position it in the market, what your podcast is going to feel like, the tone of it, the emotional content of it. I like to find a musical cue for podcasts that will tell you all of that information in just a few seconds, like an undeniable stinger that is the essence of the podcast. And that's something that is part of making a podcast, Right. Is your partner going to be doing that social promotion? Are they going to secure the influencers? Mm-hmm. Do they have relationships with lots of B2B influencers that will give you a head start? Mm-hmm. And it is that whole ecosystem as well. Are you just getting somebody who's going to throw the audio together for you? Yeah. Or is it that promotion? Is it getting that cadence for you, making sure it's syndicated, activating influencers, optimizing blog posts, doing social promotion? Right. maybe even managing some paid promotion.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a lot to think about.
It is, especially for B2B. We want this to be top class kind of content, and really thinking through that brand is super important. And then also ask the partner how they produce the shows, right? Like, as Josh said, are you just kind of calling me up and interviewing me, or do you really have a machine that really locks in, the details that we talked about through the 4? What did you think?
That was a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you for getting there. You're showing promise.
Okay, there's another cool thing that Josh alluded to earlier, and this sort of has to do with publishing, but it's about leveraging all of this content, all of these interviews, and repurposing it into something that's bigger and even more dynamic. Did you want to talk about that?
Well, like I said, we had that wonderful Tech Unknown example where we took the podcast content and turned it into text with some snippets and some really gorgeous design.
Yeah, really beautiful.
And made something that we could be really proud of to show people and pull in that new audience. So, and we've done this with several other clients too. When we think about the podcast ecosystem, it's not just grabbing that audio and putting the podcast out and calling it a day, because that audio is still content.
Yep.
And that can be repurposed. We had the AI asset for Profix that I talked about. We had a beautiful asset for Adobe that is some of the coolest design I've seen in a good long time. Yep. We had SAP, the Path to Digital Innovation interactive experience. That was amazing. My favorite, though, the Laser Bear.
Yeah.
To break free of boring B2B, where we took influencer content and turned it into the most imaginative, wildly designed thing I've ever seen. And we kept that one in-house. That was for us.
Right. I mean, who doesn't want a bear in their interactive
But
assets?
if you need a Laser Bear, we got Laser Bear. That's what I'm saying.
It's true. And the beautiful thing is, if you do podcasting with Top Rank, you build up points for every podcast you execute with us. And then those points can be applied to interactive assets like this. So it's something else to ask your potential partner with if you are going to partner.
Yeah, it's kind of like Skee-Ball, only instead of getting like Pixie Sticks or the big boombox, if you really get the 40,000 tickets, you're actually getting something that will help you connect with your audience. Exactly.
Perfect. So really, for B2B podcasting that gives you all of these benefits, thinks through your brand, publishes, actually executes the promotion, the social promotion, and then gives you points for an interactive asset, you should be able to get in for probably under $3,000 a podcast. Yeah, and if that interests you, then maybe just think about the KPIs, again, that you might want to be measuring with your podcast series. And those include?
They include downloads is pretty much the atomic unit for a KPI for a podcast. That's an indication that somebody grabbed your podcast and is doing something with it. That is something that we can get from the platform, and we can get that for every single download of the podcast. We can also get a pretty decent estimation of listen time through Apple and through Google. They're giving us those analytics for subscribers on their platforms. So the more subscribers we have on there, the better metrics we have on that. Also, though, when we do the written content part of this podcast ecosystem, then we can look a little deeper. And I don't like to use traffic really as a KPI. I prefer more of an engagement, looking at things like time on page, scroll depth, at clicking through to related content. All of those engagement metrics I think are more valuable. And of course, your KPIs for influencers, we include tracking URLs and everything, so we can see who has been sharing, what have they been saying, and how much traffic have they been actually driving towards that asset in terms of downloads, but also in terms of impressions on social media.
Exactly. And if you're into account-based marketing, as most B2B marketers are moving toward, you can also count new relationships built if you set up all the tracking appropriately. So it's a wonderful top-of-funnel relationship builder as well.
For sure.
Perfect. So we've got the Bitly code around over there.
We put it there and down there. Wherever you see a thing that looks like a Bitly code.
And on that landing page, you can get a roundup of the 4...
the peas in the pod.
Exactly. And a special tool that you created.
Right. A tool that I have been using myself and found useful enough that I wanted to share with you. And we will also have our slides available for this presentation, so you can go through it and show it to your CEO when you say, hey, we need to do a B2B podcast, and we need to do it with Top Rank.
Absolutely. You've got all the data and all the data that's necessary to build a case. And if you'd like to talk to us about potentially partnering, we're certainly open to that.
For sure.
All right. So
let's take a bite out of this podcasting thing before your competitors do. And please do remember that we are going to be producing more webinars like this. We're going to add a little more value to you. So subscribe to our blog so you'll know when those are coming up. And until next time, I'm just going to ask you to remember with me. Can we do it together? 1, 2, 3. Thanks for tuning in.
Sorry.
Really well.
That was awesome. Okay. Perfect. Okay, great.
Good test.
Yep, great. Okay, and so
I can just start again.
Okay.
And the second example that I wanted to put out there is SAP Tech Unknown. As a writer, I wish I could take credit for Tech Unknown, the name, because that is such a beautiful concept, but they brought that idea as the name of the business unit, and we said, that is clearly the name of the podcast. Totally. That is such a neat, just a universe of things that you can talk about. Mm-hmm. So they decided to have an industry professional be their host, and they actually secured Tamara McCleary for that. She's a well-known public speaker and also an influencer in that space. So because she's a public speaker, she's used to thinking on her feet, being dynamic, being engaging. So that helped a lot with putting the podcast together. But it also made it so that we could encourage her to go off script when we were recording with these amazing influencers like Brian Solis and like Kirk Bourne and Timo Elliott and Amber Case and all these people. I was kind of fanboying out myself listening to her interview them. But because they were able to do it that way, we ended up with a lot of stuff that just didn't quite fit in the podcast, but was still valuable content to reuse. So we went back to SAP and said, hey, why don't we take these really cool human stories that are coming out of these tech people and put it in an ebook of its own. It can be branded Tech Unknown, it's branded SAP, but then it has these amazing, interesting stories that can pull people in who may not have heard of the podcast even. Mm-hmm. And if all they do is look at that content and then click through to SAP, that's fantastic too. But it also has the podcast embedded in the asset, so they can stream them simply by clicking a link in the the ebook PDF thing that we've got. So I thought that was a fascinating kind of calls attention to how podcasts can become an ecosphere.
Right, exactly. And you don't always have to think of a podcast just living on a podcast channel. Or you shouldn't. You should think about how to extend it into other type of experiences.
Yeah, I mean, as marketers, we want to be able to use every little scrap. Like, that is a defining aspect of marketing. We don't want to leave anything on the table. So I encourage you, when you're capturing your audio, to not think of it as this is for the podcast and that's it. Like, if this is content that can live and breathe and be repurposed just like any other content you have. So
in other words, we always clean our plate.
That's right.
All right.
And come back for second.
Right? Exactly. I'll make more sausage for you.
Don't get the sausage again. I missed lunch.
Oh, perfect. Okay, great. So let's sum up the 4 Ps.
Well, it goes like this.
You're better than that.
As we talked about 4 Ps in our pod. They are the planning stage, when you're putting the podcast together. You're figuring out your content angle, who your audience is, what they want to know about, what format you're going to use, what kind of host you're going to use, and what platform you're going to put it on.
Perfect.
In producing, we talked about finding the directories, getting listed in podcast directories, putting episodes together, all of that assemblage, and making it into an actual podcast that exists. We also talked about the importance of transcription, making blog posts as part of that production process. Then we talked about publishing and how putting it on the platform is just the first step for syndicating. That gets it out into the world, getting those blog posts out in the world as well with the podcast, and the cadence that is the crucial part of making sure that people make your podcast a habit.
Mm-hmm, yes.
And finally, our final P, the little P right there, is the promotion piece, and that is, for one, baking influencer content in so that they are going to amplify using your traditional streams, your channels that you're using for all of your marketing in your podcast, but then also thinking about doing co-hosting on other podcasts. That cross-promotion piece is huge, and also an internal promotion is another piece that we didn't touch on too heavily, but that's another get people who are actually in your organization to promote your podcast as well. So all of those channels, plus your typical content marketing channels, plus a little bit of that cross promotion with podcasts, a little bit of that internal promotion, and a little bit of making sure you keep that cadence up to keep subscribers coming in.
And remember to rate the podcasts.
Yeah, that is the hugest thing, to have people in your organization, anybody that you can, put it in your CTA at the end of the podcast. The atomic unit for podcast promotion is the rating and the review. So that is really what you want people to do to get that traction for your podcast.
Massive, right? So one question we like to ask content marketers is to think about, as they move forward with their content marketing mix, how much time is your audience spending with your brand? And we heard earlier, how many seconds?
37 seconds.
Average on a blog, not our blog post, but right, average. And Josh has deployed programs here where time with a podcast has been up to 35 minutes. So these are really deep, engaging opportunities for you to move forward with. And if you think, gosh, I want to move forward with podcasting, there's a few things that you might want to think about. So if you're thinking about bringing it internally, we'll bring more podcasts and video casts out where we're educating the market and helping you with best practices for how to do that internally. But if you want to partner with someone, you should think also about how a podcast is supporting your brand, which we didn't even talk about.
Right. It comes back to that whole podcast ecosystem. Anybody can make some podcasts for you. That it's taking audio and editing it together and putting it on a platform with a feed. That's pretty simple stuff. But to have the whole podcast ecosystem, to develop a brand for the show that is complementary to but distinct from your industry brand, to actually position the podcast, to decide on that look and feel and the emotional heft of it. One thing that is hugely important that people don't think about is musical cues.
Yes.
There is for 3M, we have this wonderful little, just a few notes musical cue that immediately tells me this podcast is going to be fun and informative, and I'm humming it as I'm walking away, and I associate it with that podcast, and I picked it out. So
yeah, is that why you have your headphones on all day?
Yeah, I'm just listening to that, and it's only 10 seconds long, so I listen to it on repeat. But, But once you have all those things put together, then it is all of the marketing around the podcast that helps it become a success, right? We're talking social promotion. We talked about identifying influencers and baking in those contributions. Helps if your agency partner is, say, an industry leader in influencer marketing, especially for B2B, has a lot of established relationships with influencers. Could help if you know anybody like that. I don't know. Also, though, producing your show, bringing it out, making sure you keep that cadence, making sure that the hosts and the influencers are sharing, making sure your blog posts for every episode are optimized for SEO. All of those marketing functions around the podcast should be the responsibility of your podcast producing partner, or your, as I like to say.
Exactly, right? So looking at finding someone to help you develop your podcast brand, all of the things we've talked about from producing your show, and there's more to consider. Also, and Josh talked about this before, thinking to the future. If you're going to an event, if you need some type of campaign, you've got something that you need to integrate your content with, well, podcasts can help gather all of that content months before that campaign needs to be launched, right? So you have to be strategic in terms of your content planning and your timing. The way that we do podcasts is we're gathering content up months in advance, and then we create things like interactive assets. And our clients, if they're doing podcasts with us, they can win fabulous points.
I know, it's like skee ball, only instead of having to get 100,000 points to get the boombox that nobody ever got and you always had to settle for a handful of Tootsie Rolls, it's more like, since you are a podcast partner, you get a great deal on an amazing interactive asset that's going to help promote your event or your brand or just raise awareness of your industry.
Exactly. So you can take those points and put them to interactive assets like these.
These are, for example, our finance client Profix. We had that Adapt and Innovate. Beautiful multimedia thing where we actually had an AI voice that we recorded reading some of our influencer contributions. We had a gorgeous asset for Adobe, which I had little to do with, but I was so jealous of the design team. They got to play around with that. For Change Healthcare, we had people being able to explore some of the medical industry things. We had Content Marketing World every year. We have amazing interactive stuff. This one had playable games you could play and get a score.
Right.
And of course, there's the Laser Bear down there in the bottom corner. That we kept that one for ourselves. That was not for a client. That you can't just give away a Laser Bear.
No, you can't.
No, you got to earn the Laser Bear. But if you want a Laser Bear-esque asset, we can definitely make that happen for you.
Perfect. So if you're thinking long-term content planning, we can help build out the podcasts, leverage that content, and then move them into these interactive assets. And again, you get points every time you do a podcast with us. So if you're looking at getting into B2B podcasting, where you get all of this value that we talked about, you should be able to get in at roughly maybe a little under $3,000 a podcast. And that's probably a good price range with all of this value added at this point. Do you agree?
Oh, I agree. And then the more episodes that you do, the more that you save on them, for one. But also, every episode that you publish is going to lift every other episode that you've published. That's what we see in 3M. We've seen it in Tech Unknown as well. Every time we put out a new episode, all of the old episodes get downloads.
Okay.
So it really is an ongoing investment, and I encourage people to think of it that way.
So lift in terms of more subscribers to the podcast?
More subscribers, more downloads. So we put out episode 16, and episodes 1 through 15 all see a bump of, 5 here, 10 here, 10 here. So it really adds up over time.
Okay, so cadence and commitment.
Cadence and commitment, 2 C's, but that's pronounced... So that's no good.
No, I got it. Okay. So KPIs, what kind of performance metrics can we be looking at?
Yeah, when we're thinking about measuring success, the easiest metric that we have is the downloads. That's something that you can collect on your hosting platform that will tell you, it will only tell you that somebody downloaded it.
Okay.
Doesn't really tell you whether they listened to it, whether they liked it, but it does give you a nice solid idea of how many people are out there who are aware of this and interacting with it. When you have people subscribing on Apple Podcasts and Google Play, then you can get into some deeper metrics like listen time and the kind of device that people are listening on, a percentage of completion. So we found, for instance, with 3M, we had a percentage of our base was listening on Apple Podcasts, and that gave us a general idea to be able to say it looks like the average subscriber is listening to 15 to 20 minutes at a time, which means that we can kind of extrapolate out to people listening on other platforms. So then also, though, when you have written content with the podcast, when you're publishing a blog, as we suggested, then you can look at some of those deeper engagement metrics that we use for other kinds of content, like time on page, scroll depth, click-through to related content, engagement with that content. And also, when we're promoting, of course, we have those influencers promoting on social. We can talk about social shares, use of hashtags. We like to track every single link that we give to influencers so we can see exactly who is sharing and who is driving that traffic. So all of those we have the ability to track. And then, of course, there are the bigger goals over time, like the growth of your search engine footprint growth and your relationships in the industry for account-based marketing, that kind of thing.
Right, exactly. Yes, to top it all off, if you're a modern marketer and looking at ABM, the relationships can come out of this initiative as well.
Imagine if you were able to go to one of your target accounts and instead of saying, can we please schedule a demo, saying, I would love to have your CEO or your CMO or your CFO on my podcast. They have a lot to tell me about this industry.
Nice.
Could we have a half an hour? And that is a way that your prospects become your guests, and then you start to form a relationship there. It's a pretty powerful way to do it.
Right. What the world spins on, what marketing spins on. Okay, great. So we hope this was informative, and we have a couple takeaways for you.
Yep. If you would like some more information about us as a podcast partner, for sure, you can click that bit.ly code, which is there or there, possibly there or here. Or probably, we'll just put it like right across my forehead the whole time. That's what people are looking at anyway. I have a lot of forehead. It goes all the way to the back of my neck. But check out that code and you will have a way to contact us. We'll give you also a link to all of the slides that we've been putting up here and possibly some that we've forgot to put up. So, and also a link to that tool that I use for rolling out podcasts. It's interactive. You can fill it in for each podcast that you run. And our design team made it look nice and pretty. But it's a tool that I loved, I found useful, so I'd like to offer that to you as well.
Perfect. Great. Well, we're here to support you in your B2B podcasting endeavors, and we've got one final word.
Yeah, well, just get into this before your competitors do.
Yeah,
That's
exactly. Great.
So until next time, I'm just going to say, well, let's do it together. Ready?
Okay, ready? Nice. Was that 12 minutes? Sorry, I'm leaning.